Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino's Security Confidential. I'm your host, Manoj Tandon, and today we are honored to have as our guest Charles Herring from witfoo. We're really looking forward to this conversation. Charles has a great past and a lot of experience in InfoSec. Charles's dedication to maturing the craft of InfoSec is built on a diverse career path across the industry. He started his career in InfoSec in the U.S. Navy back in 2002, serving as the network security officer at the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. He was a contributing product reviewer for InfoWorld magazine, spent 7 years running Herring Consulting, a company dedicated to process orchestration. He dedicated his career to process orchestration and did a lot of work with veterans, law enforcement, government officials, and used that experience and his learnings that led to the formation of witfoo, which is Charles's organization at this point in time. And we're honored to have you, Charles.
Oh, good, Manoj. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. Happy to spend the time with you.
Oh, I'm glad that you're here as well. And another little bit, we're going to talk about information security, but we're also going to talk about diving because we haven't had a real diver on this show. So we've had yoga coaches, we've had laughter coaches, we've had security architects, a lot of CISOs, but you're the first diver. So
I'm pretty good at it. The number of ascents match my number of descents, which tells you I'm pretty good. That's
wow.
Always equal those out.
Excellent. So, Charles, let's start this discussion off with the beginning. We are always very curious, and our listeners are really curious about how people got their start in cybersecurity. And this is for us a two-part question. We'd like to understand how you got started, but also your transition from the military to civilian life. That's a topic that we get a lot of questions on, and we would love to get, as a veteran, we'd love to get your insights on that and perhaps help other veterans become very successful.
Yeah, that's a great question. It was really stressful for me coming out of the military. You have a lot of great stuff, great support system. You have a focused mission. You have leaders that have grown up being taught regularly how to be better leaders. You have a set of core values, and you have a team around you that cares about all aspects of your life, making sure you're good at work, safe at work, taking care of you, willing to put in with you, right? They're willing to own each other, right?
Right. And
so, sort of leaving that, coming into the corporate world is a whole different animal that we are. That support structure is gone. We tend to live in this dichotomy of work life and home life, and so we sort of have these casual relationships with our coworkers instead of having more connected, deeper relationships that we shared with our fellow servicemen when we were in the service. And so, it was real hard for me. The first thing is just trying to figure out how to get the support system in place because, who do I talk to? Where do I go? Who can commiserate with me? Where can I bounce ideas off of? How do I get better? Because one of the great things that virtually all veterans have from the experience is adaptability, the ability to understand the new theater they're in and adapt to it. But it's challenging without the support system. It's frankly terrifying. And so first thing was just getting involved in some veteran organizations like the American Legion and VFW to have some veterans to bounce ideas off of and have that level of support, right? On the personal level, you have to be grounded there when you come home and have some help. And then really the adaptability is a whole different, the way organizations tend to run in general are loose missions, right? So the mission can change, the interpretation of the missions can change. Values, if they're defined, aren't necessarily widely adopted in the organization. So being patient is another thing we learn in the service. We stand a lot of watch. And so staring, waiting is something we really have to lean into because things don't happen very fast. And there's a lot of politics. So relearning how to interact with people that are not so in lockstep it was a big challenge, right? So talking to other veterans that have been through that, just on the small details, like I'm having a problem with so and so at work. I think they hate me. Am I doing this wrong? Am I pushing too hard? So I think a lot of it's just interpersonal skills, and going through the hiring process is tough because us veterans we want to go charge the hill. We want to solve the problem. And sometimes corporations don't want to run that fast, or there's emotions and politics and things that we're generally not accustomed to. But yeah, definitely having your new command. We PCS or do a permanent change of station inside the military when we're active duty, and sort of realizing that you are PCSing into a new command that's just outside of the military. You need to get the support structure set up. But I will say in cybersecurity, every problem you have in general in transition is worse in cybersecurity because it's an immature craft. We have problems defining what the real outcome should be, or what a good, we can't agree on that. We have problems communicating amongst ourselves inside of the different parts of cybersecurity. We have a huge problem communicating with the rest of the business in the terms. So it can be it's a very frustrating craft to be in general. And so learning how to be useful and patient and helping navigate what's currently an immature craft and helping it mature is daunting. But fortunately, most of my team they're veterans, and they're fantastic. They're adaptable. They're able to change. And when I talk to employers that don't get it, that are having struggles in understanding the value in a veteran, just give them some room. Let him or her run with it. Give them the ability to make some transformation. They'll deliver it. And organizations that want to change do that. And I think it's also important for veterans to connect and network with each other about which companies are mission focused, that do have a culture that's around values, and you don't want to jump off into some dog eat dog kind of scenario. Right out the gate. So the main things for me is make sure you get a support group up. We have the same problems. We do often when we leave the military, we often go back to our hometowns where there's not necessarily a base, there's not the infrastructure. And so finding like-minded servicemen, veterans is a huge help just to bounce ideas off of, and we do help each other. But yeah, support system is probably the most important piece because there is going to be change. It's different than any other change of command that we've had before that.
So what, Charles, is a little surprising to me is always that there's nothing in military operations that's static, especially those who have served on the front line in the field. The situation is continually evolving. It's changing. You have to adapt and make decisions on a split-second notice. I would think coming into the civilian world, it would be a heck of a lot easier. I mean, those decisions that are being made in field operations are very difficult decisions. On the civilian side of things, I would think it would be easy as pie.
Well, so most of the things we're doing in military are very empirical, concrete objectives, things you can see, things you can interact with. They're going to be dangerous or volatile, and the consequences are challenging. So they're empirical in the field generally. And the second thing is we have well-defined rules and operations that we know how we're going to do work. When I enlisted in the Navy, my craft was I was an aviation electronics technician. I fixed the weapons and electronic systems on Hornets, on F-18s. And I thought that I was going to go in and it was my big brain against this billion-dollar aircraft and troubleshooting it. But after I get through training, I find out, I push a button in the wheel well, a maintenance code comes out. I look that maintenance code up in a publication, and I work a flow chart, work it through, and then when I'm done, the plane's fixed, and then QA happens, and we test the aircraft and turn it back around. And so, even though very expensive, very complicated, a lot of times doing that on a flight deck and in the Persian Gulf or somewhere else, those things are empirically more dangerous and stressful. But the structure, how we do things, what's acceptable, the steps we're going to take, how we're going to QA it, there's so much structure. And when I after 9/11, when I was detailed to the Naval Postgraduate School to spin up the network security group, that was my big aha moment that not everything is that way, because it was, just after 9/11, about 20 years ago now, and the command has figured out how to do cybersecurity. Uh, and there's no publications, there were no flow charts, there was no training, there was no professional development, and it really was whatever I thought was right, and it was disorienting.
So there was no
Um,
playbook for it, which,
right.
and for what you're describing is that there is a playbook on an F-18, but cyber, we know, even when we have playbooks on security orchestration, but they don't, they evolve on situation to situation. I think we're going to get into that a little bit, but before we get there, I guess another point along this is, do you have any message for employers that might have a bias, or I should say any kind of difficulty in considering a veteran for a position in their organization?
In general, especially in cybersecurity, we need diversity, particularly occupational diversity. A lot of the problems we have in the craft is because we're doing the same thing the same way over and over again, and nothing's getting better, right? We're just sort of resigned to the fact that things are going to get worse and worse, which is ridiculous. And one of the most important pools of occupational diversity are military veterans. They're adaptable. They understand outcomes. They understand the investigative mindset, the troubleshooting and investigative mindset of solving problems and understanding rules of engagement and those types of things. So what I would say is, if an organization wants to get healthy, they need to onboard people that have the ability to solve for the outcomes of cybersecurity, healthy cybersecurity outcomes. And veterans are going to be in that mix. I don't think it's possible to build out a security practice that is going to have the outcomes of creating deterrence against cyber criminals, securing the network, meeting risk requirements. You can't do those things without the adaptability that can only come from folks that have been in these empirically challenging situations and have learned how to engineer around it, how to solve for that. So I would say, first, align your outcome to wanting success. And then as soon as you do that, you're going to realize you can't possibly deliver that without the occupational diversity that comes with military veterans.
I think that's an excellent point, and I hope people listening take good note of that. But now, getting back to the playbook, so you started off in the Navy and getting into cybersecurity, and there was no playbook. So, and you're right. I mean, even today, people think that there's very finite steps 1, 2, and 3, and not everybody can agree on what those steps should be, or how they should be done, or how they should be communicated. Everything you stated is correct. But when you kicked this off in the Navy, I take it this was in its infancy, the entire program.
Yeah, absolutely. The challenge, most of my life, the last 20 years, has been about studying the craft of cybersecurity. And crafts have very concrete things. Talk about naval aviation, the manuals that drive naval aviation that I learned how to do. Those things, it's called the NATOPS and ATOPS, which is, we say it's written in blood, because the criticality, the errors were, we're losing airplanes and we're losing life when we err, when we mess something up. So the need to get it right, to figure out what process is safe, what process is repeatable, what process is trainable. That all happened in the first 100 years of building that craft, really the first 50 years of building out the craft of naval aviation. So we don't have that criticality, for one, in cybersecurity operations. We also don't have that much time. We haven't been 50 years into it. And so that's one critical problem. I study what I call 7 unstable conversations in cybersecurity, the craft, the things that we need to communicate with each other. Data is the building block for a conversation. Okay. But to have a conversation, you need to understand the audience, you need to understand the intent and what the outcome is. But the first part of it is establishing a unit of work. As guys like you and I that have occasionally carried a quota, we know you work off a unit called an opportunity. How many opportunities you have, what's the size, what's the deal size, what's the likelihood, is it a commit? There are all these characteristics around that unit of work. Yesterday I was in downtown Chicago. I took an Uber down there. That whole organization runs off of a unit called a trip. And I get to have a meal. That unit is a ticket or a table inside of restaurants. And what you're able to do on that unit is to perform business planning. How many people do I need to do per unit? How much quota can a sales guy carry? How many trips can an Uber driver make? How many miles can they? How much money are they going to make on that? And same thing for servers in the restaurant industry and virtually any other mature craft. In aviation, I had a maintenance action form. Right, there was something either scheduled or unscheduled maintenance. That was a unit of work. There were things I had to do to complete it. There were things I could not do. And there was process and documentation that went around that unit of work. And the fundamental challenge that I had when I was spinning up the network security group, I had 7 sailors working for me. We had budget and all these things, but I couldn't figure out what the unit was. What is the work? And so I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out, because the unit is very important you get it right, because the trip makes sense to everybody in Uber, right?
That's right.
The meal makes sense to everybody at the restaurant, and the opportunity makes sense to everybody in the sales organization, and even beyond that to the executives. And so when you're talking about the unit of work in cybersecurity, what's the right unit? And the thing that I realized later on, much later on, was it has to be in the context of a crime. That someone is trying to steal our patient records, or someone is trying to extort money via ransomware. And those words don't just make sense to cybersecurity people. They make sense to every board member, whether they're a CISSP or not. But the challenge, there's this pivot that happened, and I wish I could make a movie out of it. when I was spinning up the network security group, it was the reason I was there, and the funding didn't come out of IT. It came out of national security reasons. And so the cybersecurity group was a security group that focused on cyber. My boss, my department head, was the director of security for the base. So my division peers were not the server people and the IT people. It was the chief of police. It was the intel officer. And so, we carried sidearms in the cybersecurity group, network security group at the Naval Postgraduate School, because it was security. And our outcome was, someone is trying to harm us. We need to stop them. We need to deter them, and one way or another, whether it's handcuffs and prosecution, or something more military. But I also had the meetings. I go from those meetings where we're talking about adversaries and crimes to IT meetings with my peers, interdepartmentally, where we're talking about patches and firewall blocks and packets and things that make no sense. And I realized in the beginning, I was trying to say that the conversation, the same data that I had, I used in one way in security, and then I used another way in IT. But when I'm talking to the admiral, it was always the security language he understood. It didn't make sense for me to run it through an IT filter and then try to reinterpret it back into business, which is something innately understandable and comprehensible about security when we talk about it as crime, instead of talking about it as risk management alone.
So when you're presenting to the admiral, the unit that you're talking about is the number of crimes prevented or intrusions prevented. Was that a measure was that the unit?
Yes, it's a number of. So when we talk about crime, you have civilian crime. You also have, in that case, it was also national security issues. So a nation operating against our nation. And then you also had policy violations. One of the students or faculty were doing something that was in violation of the command's policy. And those are mostly true across every organization. Someone's trying to commit a crime, steal data, disrupt service, break our services, extort money. They're doing a crime that lines up to some U.S. code or some legal code, right? That can be prosecuted. And that was a unit. How many attempts did we have? How many attempts did we stop? What's the nature of the adversary trying to do these things? What can we do to further deter them from doing this? What can we do to prevent? That's the risk part, right? How can we shore up our defenses so that they're less likely to be successful? But the result, you think about law enforcement, police officers don't normally get to stop crimes.
No, they're reactive after the fact.
Right. They bring
A lot of
deterrence.
cybers like that too.
Well, so that's a challenge. When I talk about the 7 conversations, the main thing, the outcome that we should be driving towards in cybersecurity is increasing deterrence for criminals. And there's a number of reasons challenges that we've had historically that are starting to get better. If you look at the 2020 FBI cybercrime report, the interaction, especially in the financial sector with FBI, has gotten so much better. They're sharing information with law enforcement. They figured out how to package. They're not looking at logs as data. They're looking at logs as evidence. And so they're collecting it and packaging it in a way so they can produce an affidavit to FBI. And FBI recovered something, maybe it's a stat wrong, but something north of 70% of wire fraud they recovered. So this idea that international, that was, you pull up the crime report, is fascinating, and it's getting better every year because the financial sector has figured out the code of silence doesn't lead to a safer world. So the wire crimes are starting to go down, and so you're starting to see this move to cryptocurrencies, on the payouts of ransoms of different sorts that are where the reporting is not happening, the bank's not involved, so they're not able to be a good citizen. But in virtually every other vertical, we're not calling the police. We're not calling each other. We're not being good citizens because frankly, we don't know how to yet, I think is a major driver.
A lot of groups have set up these ISACs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which are intended as an information sharing warehouse. But you're saying that's certainly not enough. I know across the industry, we could probably, even in our group of MSSP MDR firms, we could probably do a much better job of sharing and communicating with our colleagues in friendly co-opetition. Right?
That's true. That's true. Right. As good citizens, us getting the bad guys off the street is very important. And the other leg of this is starting to become more and more important is the cybersecurity insurance underwriters and the adjusters, because they're realizing those here in Chicago, we had the CNA breach last month, massive. Yep. We don't know the whole impact of what that's going to end up doing yet, but potentially the attackers could have, whether they did or not, I don't know, could have gotten a list of who's insured for how much. So now you have a list of targets and how much their payout could be. McDonald's is insured for whatever, 10 million or whatever their insurance is. And now the attackers have a list, a menu of tasty morsels to go after. And it's important for each organization to protect each other. It used to be you didn't have to outrun the bear. You just had to outrun the slowest runner.
Right.
But now it's not true if the bear is getting a taste for the more expensive, better tasting meat, right?
Yeah, they're going to skip the slowest guy and say, that dude tastes better. Let's go after that.
And so the way that works is you have the collaborative, market sharings are important. Vendors like me, we have to find ways of sharing information without bankrupting ourselves, right? There's proprietary information that we want to protect, but one of the things our community does is, if we have 20 customers that are or deployments that are using something like Palo Alto, and Palo Alto is picking up a given set of detections, and that gets anonymously submitted up to our cloud service, then the guys that are maybe using Cisco ASAs that aren't currently detecting those IOCs, they are logging that the connections are happening and they match against that threat feed. Now the ASAs are able to benefit from the intelligence from Palo Alto because the mutual customers are sharing that intelligence that we're detecting these IOCs from these detection methods. And, one of the things we learned in working with law enforcement is dealing with anonymous tips. So with the ISACs and other data sharing is sometimes too many tips is too much work. How do you vet the quality of intelligence, threat intelligence? And so one of the ways that you do that in physical law enforcement, if you have a tip line, is through corroboration. That if you have multiple sources reporting the same thing, and especially if there are multiple types of sources, if it's coming in from a video camera and it's a human actor and there's a credit card charge, all those things provide corroboration of a fact. and it makes each one of them stronger. And so when you have, CrowdStrike detecting stuff, and then boom, now it's being hit by Carbon Black, and the corroboration of the detection methodologies, plus you have the corroboration of the submitting organizations, give you a confidence level that it is a legitimate, real tip that should be taken seriously, and you should be on the lookout for. And that it's more challenging. We've been working around that. Also, the part of, if that submission happens, there is a bit of a risk. If there's an audit trail, if it's not an anonymous submission, there's a potential for a subpoena, to where if I said I have data on this attacker, law enforcement may be investigating them and come to me with a subpoena to say, give me all your information.
Right.
And in talking to my friends in federal and local law enforcement, I tell them, it's like, if I get rear-ended in my car and I call the police and you show up and take a statement, and I give you the affidavit, you don't follow me home and go through all of my stuff. That's too much risk. But that's what we're having to do. And it's not that law enforcement's overstepping. It's that the organizations aren't collecting data with the outcome in mind of handing an affidavit of evidence over to law enforcement. So law enforcement has to come in and go through all the records. It's sort of like doing a tax return when all you have is shoe boxes full of receipts. So it's very exhausting for law enforcement, but you never know what law enforcement is going to pull out of that shoebox.
That's a really good analogy. But going into this is about what we're seeing as threats in across our monitored platforms. The one place that I don't see any information sharing is what the red teams are doing. So when we look at our whole wonderful pyramid of pain, the very tip of that is not the domain of any vendor, right? When you get into unknown unknowns, that is the domain of human consciousness, human beings working on a hunch, trying to piece a jigsaw puzzle together, say, you know what, this might be a new thing. We don't really see much of that unless we've gone to Black Hat or we've gone to some other conference and we have our own private networks of people that we're constantly collaborating with, but there's really no good means of talking to those folks who are really digging through the logs, if you will, and trying to correlate things that machines are not capable of doing.
Yeah, there is a good bit of hunting involved, and the couple of things that work really well in catching the unknowns are, honeypots are great things. Potentially any kind of deception technology inside of a network works great. If things start talking to a box that's not supposed to be there, there's not a false positive scenario here. Someone's doing something they shouldn't be doing. And so allowing them to dig into that is a great tripwire. And there's several good technologies out in the market that, TrapX and a few other that are out there doing good commercial support on these deception technologies. But, honeypots are very powerful, whether they're outside or inside, and just figuring out something's wrong. And then the investigative mindset really is about following the evidence, that you have a trigger, you have something that happens. Someone, and same thing in law enforcement, someone calls and says, there's a problem, I see something suspicious. There's an investigative process of going through that. This starts with developing a theory. Detective Bill Rich is an advisor of ours and a really sharp guy out of LAPD. And but he's not a cyber guy. He's been a homicide detective for years. But when I was explaining to him sort of how we do investigations as cybersecurity, he was indignant. He says, let me tell you this. Let me say I drive to a house and there's 20 bullets in the house and 20 shell casings on the ground. What I do is I draw a big circle in my mind around this scene, and I put a theory towards it. Is this a bank robbery? Well, no, probably not a bank robbery. There's no bank. That doesn't fit the theory. It's not a carjacking. There's no car. But this could be a drive-by shooting. So you sort of go through these theories of what the evidence could fit into. And he says, but what we tend to do in cybersecurity operations is we'll pick up the shell casing. We might even assign 40 guys, one guy to each shell casing, one guy to each bullet. And he's just thinking through what this thing could mean. And so you're starting sort of at this micro level, trying to find a way to a theory. But in law enforcement, you start with a theory. And then as you follow the evidence is either going to prove a theory, the more evidence you're able to feed into the model, or it's going to disprove it. And so,
which is hypothesis-based threat hunting. I mean,
that's exactly right. You have the model, and the more evidence you feed into it, it's going to, or as like he's like to say, if I have the murder weapon, I have the murder on tape, I have the confession, I have all these things. It's an open and shut case. I have all the evidence, so there's no room for ambiguity. But yeah, the signals to start an investigation are very important. Whether that's deception technology. There was one other I was going to throw into that mix, but maybe I'll come back to me later. The other thing is getting away from triage. Because of the volumetric nature of signals that we have, because unlike physical law enforcement, I can't come back and set up detection after the crime happens. My desk has fingerprints on it, even though I haven't configured fingerprint processing. I can do that later. But in digital, you have to have all of the collection and processing set up before the event occurs, which means we're processing a lot of data. In a lot of organizations I work with, it's terabytes or up to petabytes a day of signals that are coming in. And so what we've had to do as a craft is triage which signals are the important ones. And it does sort of, a lot of the hunting comes down to intuition, because we can't possibly process all of it. I can't do a million anything in a day. And so you can't go through that many signals. So because we're triaging, we're missing things. And a healthy craft doesn't triage, not in perpetuity. You do have triage during crises, but at some point the broken arm has to get fixed. You can't always stay in triage. But it is about processing every signal in the context of every theory, and computers can do that. And then again, you don't always have all the evidence, so that's where humans get involved. And sometimes humans have to go and tase somebody. Maybe I probably can't get away with that, but interrogate someone,
right?
Ask the questions, do the digital forensics on the machines. But it is the process of detecting the net new the ODA stuff, right? That's always going to be a challenge. And really, whitelisting is what I was going to go through. Process whitelisting, traffic whitelisting, zero trust are things that create a very small space for a 0-day type of exploit to get through. And even when we're working with red teams or automated attack simulation type of tools, it's important for the blue team, for the defenders, the responders, to understand where they are and to be able to synthesize what I call synthesized attacks from actual attacks, because there's different response actions to those. But yeah, it is a challenge. But I think mostly the talk about the 7 unstable conversations. The first one is investigators can't understand, process the data coming from their tool sets. They can't process all the evidence. And it's a fundamental challenge that we've been working on. When I first started doing security operations, the unit was the row. It was the alert that would come in, the firewall block, and so you just have these things flowing so fast past you can't even read them, much less comprehend them. And then as an industry, we started to pivot to computer or asset-based aggregation, right? To where we take, here are all the alarms that are on this machine. Here's the most alarming machine, right? And so you would focus on the machine. And then we moved off as an industry into a new layer of aggregation in the UBA stuff, where we'd say, let's establish some graph relationships between these things. What credential is attached to these hosts that are attached to these alarms, and start building that out. And, I like some of the work that Chronicle does at Google on IOC aggregation, to where the relationships between known IOCs, because on the IOC, you can put intent. Who do we think, or who do we know in some cases is the creator of this thing? And then you can build a relationship, because now you have a crime, because this evidence is associated with this human, and these relationships between these entities exist. And then a lot of the research I did is around in the earliest, the first area of research we did was around modus operandi aggregation. That instead of tracking the signal, you update every relationship between everything, every computer to computer connection, every computer to user session, every file presence, all of those graph edges and nodes. As evidence comes in, it's telling you more and more about every one of those relationships. And then you're tracking the characteristics of those relationships. And if that relationship looks like it's potentially reconnaissance fits into a kill chain, several kill chains. One might be data theft, right? Or it could be a number of things, but you basically have these open theories. And as more evidence and more relationships start connecting together across that modus operandi, one theory becomes more and more clear, more and more likely, and the other theories become less and less likely until they're disqualified in the same way that you investigate crime. But in that way, it gets us out of triage, because that was the thing that drove me crazy. And working with folks over the last 20 years, the most heartbreaking thing is to work with teams that are doing their best to look somebody in the face that busted their rear end from sun up to sun down and didn't get 1% of their work done. And then the next day it's going to start over again. That's a heartbreaking job to be in. And so it's, I tell them, if you can only get 1% of your work done, just quit and go to the bar and drink all day.
You might have a better outcome.
Yeah, at least you'll enjoy it more.
Yeah. So you mentioned there's 7 conversations. We've talked about one. Can you summarize what the other?
Yeah. So the second conversation. Yeah. So the first conversation, the solution to the first conversation is building a unit of work that delivers clarity for the investigator, so the investigator can comprehend their work. Second one is the managers of investigators need to be able to manage the investigators. Do I have enough people? Do the people have the right tools? How many people should I have? How do I professionally develop my investigators? And if you can't look at the work of each individual contributor into what they're contributing, what's the quality of their work, you can't audit it. You can't help them grow. You can't correct them so that they see their blind spots. You don't know what training to send them to. It's very difficult for the managers to manage their people. The third problem is one we're all too familiar with, is the security practice cannot properly communicate with the broader business. That they think we're a bunch of nerds doing, stuff here. Yeah. And
a lot of missed dialogue. Part of the reason is a lot of times CISOs don't end up at the big boy table. That's a whole conversation on that.
It's true. And sometimes there's not even a CISO, right? And that's another part of the problem. But it does put a lot of weight on the CISO to be an immaculate storyteller. And one of the major areas of research we did was just like trying to get the cybersecurity practice into GAAP or general accounting principles, like QuickBooks. How many things are happening? How much is it costing us? If we bring a tool in, how much money does it save us? Is this tool configured correctly? Are we maximizing the value? If we throw X amount of money at it, what's the ROI? And to be able to do those things, enable security practices to have sustainable conversations. Working with one of the universities here, one of our first times going through this cycle, the CISO went to the trustees and said, "Hey, I want to do a proof of concept on this email protection platform. I want to take 10% of the users, the alumni, faculty, staff, students, put them in this use case. We're going to see how much more we can see. So how does it impact our visibility and handling risk? But also, how much labor would it remove by stopping things from ever happening, or what we call a disrupted incident or the disrupted crime, right? Someone tried to phish us, but the tool stopped it." And so the findings were remarkable. It was something in the realm of like $500,000 in labor would be needed if those policies weren't put in place. And so fortunately the tool was less than that, $500,000 a month. By $500,000 a month, they would have to staff people just to deal with the problems that university was facing. And so being able to go to the board and say, you give me X, I'll give you back 10X, and we're going to reduce risk as a promise ahead of a procurement exercise. And then the procurement exercise happens, and be able to go back and say, okay, yep, I anticipated a 10X return. We're getting 12X back. That's allows for what I call sustainable conversation, where it's not trying to scare the board one more time or trying to get them to believe in you one more time, or where it just feels like
Right.
this unhealing wound, to where it is, boss, can I save you some money and make things safer? To make that promise and improve it, those are things that makes for a good executive, and the CISOs like that better. So that's the third one. Fourth one, we already talked about a little bit, that organizations, I'm sorry, that's not the fourth one. Fourth one is security vendors lie. I'm a security vendor, I lie. We go to conferences to learn how to lie. That's also all lies. But the
We actually had a paper, lies, more lies and damn lies, but that's that we put out there.
well, because and it's not that we mean to necessarily, but we get so deep into our own stuff. It's not an intentional lie, but we think our thing can do things that it can't necessarily do given the context, right?
I'm going to circle back to that because that's
Well,
a whole nother topic. So that's number 4.
That's number 4,
Right.
and it's just basically, if a vendor or a provider promises you they're going to deliver something, you need to be able to, like, if you come in and hire someone to do professional services to tune your firewalls, did it actually do anything? How do you know? The only thing we currently have is the word of the person that did the work. And so to be able to see,
you should see a reduction in false positives. You should see you should start seeing things happening in your securities operations center when you start making changes.
you should,
If you're initiating a tuning project without having that end in mind, then you're going to get whatever you deserve.
right?
That's
And that's true. You have to have some way of metering that, and that can be a very challenging piece. The fifth one is, as we said, organizations are challenged in sharing information with each other efficiently, reducing the risk to tell someone, "Hey, I'm being attacked by these IOCs. You should look out for these IOCs." It creates risk for them to admit that, and it creates work. And so, reducing that. The sixth one is we talked about this one also. Law enforcement and organizations don't share information. And the seventh one is based on that law enforcement lacks the evidence to adequately prosecute criminals because it's all inside of our networks. It's not available to law enforcement. And so those are the 7 that we study. Been studying over the last 6 years, and doing 4,200 experiments at this point to learn what we've learned. And they're challenging things, and they're things that are easy to say. And they're all, and for us, fortunately, we have to solve for any one of them. So anything that we build can't break the other one of the other 6 conversations, which has been helpful for us. But yeah, those are the 7.
So, are any of these companies, are they doing them well, or are they generally lacking across the 7?
As a craft, yeah, we have, it's a systemic problem, and it's
okay.
It's more art than it is craft right now. That it should be a flow chart instead of chicken bones and and great storytelling.
I'll tell you what, Charles. I mean, I can't believe how quickly time has flown here. We've out of 10 questions, we've only gotten to 3. So one thing I do want to do, I know your time is limited. I want to understand a little bit about witfoo and how witfoo came into existence, and what exactly are you guys all about?
Yeah, so the product we peddle is a big data SIM essentially. So it's send all your data in, we process all the data, we create units of work. There's SOAR playbooks, all of those things for orchestrating the work, and then we use those units of work to create reporting. So things on is there gap overlap between my tools and how we're detecting and responding to things? Should I tune a tool? Am I maximizing the value? Do I have false positives? Do I have a tool that's set to detect only, detect and block? And we also do automated compliance checking. So against the 850 and this 853, how many controls are we detecting from your telemetry that are in place? So a lot of our research is around natural language processing and comprehending every message. So a message comes in, our team that we've never seen before, we don't know what it is. That opens up a ticket. Our research team goes out, reaches out to the vendors, understands the etymology of that message, and we build what we call a semantic frame. And that's just explaining how it works. And then once we understand what's in the message, why it was sent, what we're supposed to do with it, how does it map to frameworks like STIX or the MITRE ATT&CK continuum, then we're able to stitch that together into these modus operandi investigations. We also work a lot with MSSPs. So we have um, a federated mode, multi-tenant mode, several multi-tenant modes in that space. And we work with sharing that information if we need to, working right now on a report to police button. So you can send that affidavit of attack in a way that makes sense to law enforcement. So that's our big driver this year is bridging through that. But yeah, it's a way of us making sense of all the data, trying to stabilize those 7 conversations, providing the tools for that anyway, to give folks opportunity. I like to say we don't write great journalism. The heroes out in the field are doing all the real work. We're just giving them the equipment, giving them the gear to do the good stuff.
How did the name come about?
So wit is keenness of mind. Like you're really witty. You're a smart guy. You've got intelligence. And that part comes from what we're doing is normalizing and collecting the things we already know. There's this big move to do AI and machine learning and all these trick plays that we're going to do, and I realize most of the stuff we need to do we already know. There is always stuff to learn. There's always new ways to look at things and do anomaly detection and those sort of trick plays. But what we currently have in the cybersecurity community is a ton of knowledge. We needed a way to collect it and operationalize it. And foo is just hacker slang from my old days on skill. How's your podcast foo? How's your Python foo? And so it's putting that knowledge to work. So it's really building this little army to come in as we learn stuff at one organization that gets ported out through what we call the witfoo libraries, where we collect all this global intelligence, ways of looking at data, ways of visualizing it, and we make that available to the whole community, and we curate that. So it's just
really. So is there a charge for that to get access to it?
Yeah, so we do. That's how I eat.
Well, you gotta eat. I can't blame you for that.
But yeah, it's all. If you go to witfoo.com, we are pretty transparent. The price. We only have one SKU, and it's basically based on knowledge workers or employees in an organization. We have managed security service providers that will host it. They'll provide services around it as well. But we do sell. The software includes all of the sharing, all of the intelligence. We keep it turnkey. Spin it up, scalable, as many nodes as you need to meet your requirements. But just let us take care of it. I had a dear friend of mine, TK Chianini, he's at Cisco. He's Cisco's CTO over security. He said the first time he went to RSA was like going to a transportation conference where all the attendees wanted to buy cars, but all the vendors are selling car parts. And so really wanted to build something that had the windshield wipers and everything. We didn't have to bring your own carburetor and try to put it all together. So it's one of our driving principles there. Keep the pricing simple, keep the deployment where you can deploy it, spin it up. We're doing pretty well in that regard.
Are there any organizations, events, things that you'd like to plug that our listeners should be aware of, where you'll be appearing, books coming out, or papers you'll be presenting, things? So
there's a couple of things. I'm launching a project called LogFibber, LOGFIBBER, so logfibber.com or .org. It's an open source under Apache 2 project. We're releasing the code. The repo will go public at Black Hat here in the summer. But it's essentially a kit for doing training or red team stuff where you write up all these lies that you want your tools like witfoo Precinct or Splunk or whatever you're using to believe, and then you configure these fake devices. Like I have a Palo Alto at this address, and I have I'm using CrowdStrike Falcon, and you write up all these devices that you want to emulate. And so based on the natural language processing we've done with semantic frames, we have this library of what I call reframes that take these generalized messages and turn them into proprietary messages. So how would an ASA say this thing happened? And so we're launching an education initiative later this month where this toolkit's a part of it, to where educators can go and say, okay, here's what Edward Snowden did in the booze, Allen, that whole NSA breach, PRISM breach. This is what it would look like in our tools. This is what the messages would look like if they were using the tool set, a Cisco stack, or this is what it looked like if it was best of breed, or this is what it looked like with CrowdStrike versus, so you can generate the metrics to train against. and also really powerful thing for messing up blue teams. A powerful team for red teams, just to go in there and completely gum up responsibilities by generating a ton of lies. So that's coming out. The website is up, and you can sign up for access to that. I am speaking at in real life for the first time.
Wow. No Zoom, huh?
No Zoom. I'm so excited. So I'll be at B-Sides, Northern Virginia. That's on the first weekend of June. So and that talks on breaking network behavioral anomaly detection, breaking UBA, breaking SIM. It's actually called Breaking In Bad, which I of course ripped off from a great TV show. But that talk, I'm going through sort of the same thing. How do you poison data? How do you trick blue teams into making bad decisions in response? And also, how as a blue teamer, how do you prevent against those kind of data poisoning pieces? So that'll be my next talk there.
We'll put the links to the show in the show notes to both the B-Sides and to your new project. We will absolutely put those in. That's fantastic. And I guess in parting, of all the places that you've dove, for any budding divers out there, is there a place you would tell a beginning diver to go?
Oh, so my most relaxing place to go is Cozumel, Mexico. It's also a straight shot south of me here in Chicago. But they have these wonderful, easy drift dives. They have beautiful, so you can go down to 30, 60 feet, and you have currents just gently taking you along beautiful parts of the reef and seeing all kinds of great sea life in warm water. So you're not freezing. But yeah, absolutely, Cozumel is my favorite place to go just to relax. It's not necessarily the most exciting diving, but the water's clear, the people are amazing. And it's a very easy dive. I like to dive with Scuba Do is the name of the dive shop. I'm going to plug them because I love them so much. But they're a fantastic dive crew down there and taking care of us.
That's great. Hey, and you can have a drink with an umbrella in it as soon as you're out of the water.
Absolutely, that's the triangle I do: room, dive pier, bar. It's the whole. That's basically how I vacation for as long as I can get away with it.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an enlightening conversation. I appreciate you being on the show, and we look forward to having you back sometime.
Thanks very much. It was a great pleasure for me. I really appreciate the time.